Okay, unless you see anybody trying to enter right now, Bob, I think I'll get started.
Sounds good.
All right, excellent. Hello, I am Victoria Sue, Director of Engagement at the American Independence Museum and Coordinator of the American Independence Festival. Thank you for joining us tonight and welcome to the final Tavern Talk of the Reimagined American Independence Festival. I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, Newburyport Bank, for making this festival possible through their generosity and commitment to the community. I would also like to give a huge thank you to Bob Glowacki and his team at Exeter TV, as they have done so much to help create and make this festival content available for viewing. They have been a true partner in this reimagined festival, and we are so very grateful. This evening, local author and activist Renay Allen will be presenting on the Black Revolutionary veteran and colonial Exeter resident Jude Hall, and how her interest in Hall's history has led her to some exciting work in the field of civic engagement. Civic engagement is at the core of our mission at the museum, and Renay's work speaks to this intersection of history and civic engagement. At the museum, we have also looked into the lives of Exeter's Black colonial residents, and know that because of a lack of records and first-person accounts, it can be a very challenging subject to research. To anyone who would like to explore further, I will include links to 2 articles in the chat feature. We encourage you to look at both of those sources to learn more, and also encourage you to reach out to the Exeter Historical Society, who is a great resource for all local history. At the American Independence Museum, we are committed to expanding the story we tell of the Black population in Exeter and the nation during and after the Revolutionary War. We have added related content to our soon-to-launch virtual tours. We also highlight Jude Hall, Tobias Cutler, and others in our Ghosts of Folsom Tavern and Winter Street Cemetery tour in October. Before we begin, a few notes on how the webinar will run. We will begin by showing a video that our presenter and Exeter TV filmed in Winter Street Cemetery at the modern memorial stone placed in honor of Jude Hall. This is not his grave site, as his exact burial location is unknown, but he's believed to be buried in Winter Street Cemetery. During the video, if you have any questions, you are welcome to put them in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen, or through Facebook comments if that is how you are watching. After the video, I will ask Renay a few questions about her work, and then I will pose her questions from the Ask a Question button and from Facebook. If there is time, we will then open it up to questions from the audience by using the Raise Your Hand feature. After the presentation, I hope you will consider donating to the museum in support of programs such as this and future festivals. More information about the museum can be found at independencemuseum.org. I would now like to say a few words about today's guest presenter, Renay Allen. Renay has lived in Exeter for over 10 years and is the founder of the Exeter Lit Fest, an annual local authors festival. She has recently been applying art to activism through painting and is now trying her hand at writing. She is in the midst of writing a trilogy of local mysteries to highlight the historic Black community of Exeter, New Hampshire. She holds a master's in business communication from Southern New Hampshire University. We are so excited to have her here, and now we're going to present her video on Jude Hall, Exeter's most famous Black patriot.
Oh, good. Summer greetings from the Winter Street Cemetery in historic Exeter, New Hampshire. As part of the American Independence Festival's programming, I'd like to tell you about Exeter's most famous Revolutionary War soldier of color, Jude Hall, and his community. My name is Renay, and I live in Exeter. I recently did some research and wrote a small historical fiction mystery that features Jude. Now, to make this presentation more interesting, I've given some pictures to Bob, our cameraman, to slip them in at certain times here and there. You ready, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay. First, I'll tell you the facts about Jude, then I'll talk about some motivations, and then I'll do a short reading from my book, Incident at Exeter Tavern. Here is Jude's story, based on the most recent research. Please forgive me any errors or omissions. I'm working with the skimpy information that's available today. All the stories of Jude begin with his powerful physique. The first we hear of Jude, he is enslaved on the Blake Farm on Drinkwater Road, just over the line in Kensington. When Jude was about 16, Farmer Blake sold Jude to another farm. But Jude had other ideas and ran away instead and enlisted to fight the British. He had heard word that enslaved blacks who fought for American freedom against the British would be given their own freedom. Jude fought for 8 years. He was at Bunker Hill, where he was thrown by a cannonball. He went on to Ticonderoga, Trenton, Saratoga, Hubbardston, Monmouth. He was on the Sullivan-Clinton expedition and in the New Windsor encampment. He finally made his way back to Exeter as a free man, entitled to a military pension. Yay for the Black Patriot! He earned his freedom from slavery. But wait! Doesn't earned his freedom seem out of place in the land where all men are created equal and entitled to justice and liberty for all? Back to the story. Jude returned to Exeter and set up a small homestead on Drinkwater Road, but quite near to the old Blank Farm. Why? Nobody knows, but one can assume that his family, his mom, his dad, sisters, brothers, were still working on that farm. What is definitely known is that he married a younger local girl, Rhoda Paul. Now, back from a large family. Her father was Caesar Paul, a black man who was enslaved manservant on Cass Street from the age of 14, but later legally gained his freedom. Her mother was Lovey Rollins, daughter of a local white lawyer. You see, at that time after the war, the yellow building on the hill that houses the American Independence Museum was the New Hampshire State Treasury, where Jude and others collected their military pensions. Exeter was a normally integrated town then. The black and white soldiers had fought side by side in the war and became war buddies. The kids went to school together, some married each other, and many blacks operated local businesses and farms in town. Some blacks became quite wealthy or quite famous. For example, 3 of Rhoda's brothers went to school to become some of America's very first black Baptist ministers, such as Reverend Thomas Paul of Boston. Her sisters made good marriages with blacks who had escaped from the South and made it all the way up here by their wits, or noted black soldiers like Jude or Tobias Cutler. Back then, Exeter had the largest percentage of blacks in the entire state of New Hampshire, even more than Portsmouth. It was almost 5%, or 80 blacks and 2,700 whites. There were 14 households, 11 of which were homeowners. Now 80 blacks and 2,700 whites. If the percentages had stayed the same, there would be nearly 1,000 black citizens of Exeter today. There was once a thriving black enclave down by the river, near Water Street, Green Street, Park Street, and near the old Baptist church they attended, which stood where the Folsom Tavern is today. Rhoda and Jude lived out on Drinkwater by something that is still named Jude's Pond. They had a large family. As time went on, the soldiers, those war buddies, started to get old and die off. Sadly, by about 1810, the sentiments of the town began changing for the worse. Bigotry and discrimination befell the children of the Patriots, and it only got worse. Let's try to step into Jude's shoes for just a moment. Big, strong Jude was repaid for his 8 years of fighting for American freedom by having 3 of his beautifully grown sons kidnapped into Southern slavery. Teenager James was kidnapped by an Exeter resident while in their home on Drinkwater. His mom, Rhoda, tried to fight off the assailant. The teen victim was bound, and he set sail the next day on Captain Isaac Stone's ship Wallace out of Newburyport to be sold in Virginia. When Jude got home, he was frantic. He went to lawyers, judges. He tried to find Captain Stone, all to no avail. Nobody helped. Jude died, never knowing the fate of those 3 sons. 3 sons kidnapped and enslaved. After Jude died, Rhoda left town. Wouldn't you? Public engagement is one of the foundations of the American Independence Museum, which is why they invited me to speak to you today. I live near and often walk on Drinkwater Road and on the trails near Jude's Pond. In 2018, I learned this story of how Jude and Rhoda's sons' freedom and bodies were stolen and used for profits. I had always believed that the North had clean hands in all of this. I felt duped. It so angered me that it served as a catalyst for action. What action? I didn't know. But I wrote a small report about the historic Black community and made a goal to sit down with 100 people in this town, preachers, teachers, town officials, and more, and ask them to act upon any one of the bulleted suggestions at the end. I found that the majority of the people were unaware of this aspect of our town's history. Hoping to reach a different local audience, I then wrote a book about it. But the one slim book was not enough to tell even a fraction of the story of the historic Black community in Exeter. So, it's becoming a trilogy. Volume 2 is just launched now. Incident at Ioka looks at abolitionist era Exeter and its community as the Civil War approaches. Now, I write these mysteries light on purpose, so you can just taste a sliver of the bitter flavor, but you know it is there. Scholars can fill you in on the more nefarious aspects, or ask Barbara at the Historical Society. But even my trilogy only tells a fraction of the Black Exeter story and still has a relatively small reach. Something more public is needed. So as a form of personal redress, I have pledged the profits from my trilogy to be donated towards a physical commemoration of the historic community that once thrived near the head of Swayze Parkway. A proposal has been presented to the town officials to form a simple pocket park, a sitting area, in the names of Jude and Rhoda Hall down by the river at the head of the parkway, right in the heart of the old Black enclave. Once established, I am hoping to get New Hampshire State designation to further the reach. You can see the full proposal on my website, which will be listed at the end of this video. So here we are, in the midst of the virtual 2020 Independence Festival. Huzzah! Every year, there is a big spectacle where a rider on horseback delivers a copy of the Declaration of Independence to a costumed relative of the original guy who read it, both Gilmans, of course, while the Redcoats boo and the Minutemen cheer. Please join me now as I recreate that arrival in my book, Incident at Exeter Tavern, set during festival weekend. Let me set the scene for you and introduce some characters. Somebody has stolen that very same Declaration copy today, which is now worth millions, and our sleuth, Mary Vaughn, is looking for it. She gets help from spirits of the past, from July 1776 to be precise. Now, as you know, we don't know anything about Jude's siblings, but I have invented a brother named Scipio. But we do know about another person of that time, Tabitha Gilman Tenney, who grew up to be one of the very first American women to write a best-selling novel. And of course, we do know that Jude ends up marrying little Rhoda. So let me set the scene. One morning, Mary Vaughn is standing in front of St. Anthony's Bakery across from the tavern, and she sees a vision of 1776. The Philadelphia rider has just delivered the Declaration to the Treasury House moments before. There is to be a public reading of it, and young John Taylor Gilman has been selected to read it. He is speaking with his cousin, Tabitha, who is about 16, and she has a small girl with her, a little songbird named Rhoda Paul. Tabitha and Rhoda are standing out in front of Dr. Tilton's shop, where Jude's brother Scipio works. Running down from the yellow house upon the hill came a slim young man in a fancy green waistcoat and brown breeches, holding his tri-corner hat steadily on his head as he bounced towards them. He was a round-faced boy who appeared a couple years older than Scipio, but did not and would never have the muscular girth of the former farm slave. Tabby turned at the sound of his running footsteps. "Why, John Taylor Gilman, whatever has gotten into you?" she inquired in her slow manner of speech. "Cousin Tabby, I thought that was you. I saw her out the window. Listen now, very important." "Indeed," he huffed, out of breath from the run, but the words flowed on out of his small mouth. Indeed, a rider delivered a message from Philadelphia into the house just now. There is to be a public reading of the message in 2 hours' time on the steps of the townhouse. Indeed, Nicholas has asked me to read it and to get the Reverend to give a blessing before my reading, which I shall do next. But betwixt those, we need a song also to commemorate that which is now being born. A young voice is what we need, a psalm to manifest the devotion to the cause of liberty. Indeed, Tabby, I need you to practice your little songbird pupil in the next 2 hours to be ready to sing Billings' Psalm, America, from the steps just before my reading. Tabby nodded, and John Taylor turned to Scipio. Both of you, tell everyone you see to be at the steps in 2 hours' time, please. And leaving as quickly as he had come, John Taylor ran off towards the Congregational Church in search of Reverend Rumpel, still holding his jiggling hat upon his round head. What do you think the message is? Asked little Rhoda, her eyes wide. Tabby and Scipio looked at each other with concern and said at the same time, war. I hope my presentation has inspired you to help bring forward the honest and inclusive history of Exeter or your own town. Our silence is definitely complicit. The disregarded contributions of Black patriots and citizens deserve attention and respect. For example, Jude Hall is now on Wikipedia as of 2019, and hopefully there will be a pocket park soon. In closing, I have an ask. I invite your collaboration to change the narrative by checking the information on my website. It holds the pocket park proposal and other reports on Black Exeter and its citizens. Like Jude's nephew, James Monroe Whitfield, who published his book of abolitionist poems in 1853 and whom Exeter Lit Fest now honors along with Tabitha the first weekend in each April. My website, rm-allen.com, will also tell you where to get my mystery books for yourself, your friends, or your classroom. Together, let's bring this hidden history to the next level for the benefit of all Americans. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Bob, for filming. And thanks to the American Independence Museum for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for watching that video. And now I'd like to welcome Renay Allen to join us for some questions.
Hey, hey, hey! Back from the cemetery. Good to be with a live audience. It was pretty dead over there.
Thank you so much for joining us, Renay, and thank you also for putting together that video for us with the help of XTV. It was great. We really appreciate it. I wanted to start with a few questions to dive a little bit deeper into your work. So I think I'll just take it away from there. But I would like to say, while I'm doing that, if anybody has any additional questions they want to pop into the Q&A, the Ask a Question section, you're welcome to do that. And if I'll ask those after I ask these questions of Renay, and then afterwards we can open it up to the Raise Your Hand feature, and some people will be able to ask a question live. So I will start with Renay, how did you discover Jude's story, and where and how did you perform your research?
You know, I don't remember exactly the first time I heard Jude's story. It might be one of those things like you have to hear it 3 times before you actually hear it. So I've probably read Barbara Remkunis's article in the newspaper because I am devoted to her articles. And I'd seen his name over at Jude's Pond, but not really known what Jude's Pond was, but it's an area that I walk in. There are trails over there. So I'm not really sure exactly when I heard about Jude. But there were a few things that influenced me along the way that, you know, maybe many of us have been enlightened in recent years on. The first thing I think is I read this book called Lies My Teacher Told Me by, I think, James Lowen. And I began to realize that the North was not, did not have clean hands in the whole slavery issue. And I had always been I had always thought that they had from my schooling way back when. And then later on, maybe about 2 years ago, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation gave a grant to Exeter for the artist Richard Haynes out of Portsmouth to come and give a 6-week art and discussion class on kind of like positive visioning of racial unity. And he really influenced me to take a look at things and to distill what I had looked at and apply art towards that. He's a painter, so he was more in the art section, but I guess I've changed it up a little so that I could do some writing. So when I finally learned about Jude, I decided, well, I'll go down to the Historical Society, and I went down there and haunted Barbara a couple times, many times actually. And I also looked online a lot, and I found varied references, but there wasn't one place that he was listed. So I decided that I would get a Wikipedia account and try to list him on there. So that took a while. You'd be surprised. I was denied like 3 times before I got him up there. For him not being important enough, for not enough references on him. And I found it was kind of like a chicken and an egg cycle. So one thing that I did is I asked my friend Sarah Pruitt, who works at the History Channel, I kind of pitched the idea to her. I said, you know, we've got this kind of primary source thing in Exeter that I feel is undertold nationally. Would you like to take a crack at it? And she did, and she put it on the History Channel, on their blog. And then right after that, my Wikipedia entry got approved. So that's how it works, I guess.
That's fascinating. That is really interesting. Well, we're so glad and happy that you discovered this passion, because it's something that's important to the museum and I think the community of Exeter. So thank you for doing all that. As you're doing this research, did you find any information about additional free Black people who lived in Exeter or in New Hampshire during that time period?
Oh, yes, definitely. I haven't looked outside of Exeter because there is plenty in Exeter. And I am not the first person to do this by far. Various curators of the Historical Society have worked on it a great deal. And this gentleman, Ed Wall, I believe was his name, he has worked on it also, and there are there are documents down at the Historical Society that he has worked on, like listings of all the names, census by census, 1790, 1800, all the names listed. And he was the one who put the memorial stone for Jude in the Winter Street Cemetery out of his own personal, I don't know if he financed it, I can't say that for sure, but I kind of think that he did. So I'm not the first one to do this. I am kind of maybe the first one to apply art to it. Maybe that's where I'm a little more creative.
Yeah, great. Can you describe what happened to the free Black population in Exeter, or at least to Jude Hall's family? You touched on it in the video, but I would love to go a little deeper with that. What happened to them post-revolution?
Sure. Aside from the articles that Barbara has written, there have been 2 scholars from out of state that have come to town and done larger research projects on the Black population of Exeter. One was named David T. Dixon. And if you look on his site, davidtdixon.com, he is an actual scholar who focuses on maybe the Civil War. And he wrote a very comprehensive report on the history of the Black Exeter and actually what happened. And the word he describes in his report is effaced. The community was effaced. And how that played out was the people that became more successful went elsewhere to seek their fortunes, like Boston, where you can really make some money or a name for yourself, and that would be like the Reverend Thomas Paul, who was the founding minister of the American. It's on the Black Heritage Trail in Boston. It's on Joy Street, right behind the State House there. That whole complex, he was instrumental in that. Another brother went to England, and I believe he spoke before Parliament on issues for the Black population. So you just the normal case of people that have talent and they go to the big cities or other countries. So some people were that way. Another one of Jude's sisters, actually, she married somebody named Cutler, who I've heard you reference before. I mean, our other well-known revolutionary soldier is Tobias Cutler, and he married into the Paul family, and they had many children, and one of them was quite successful and owned a hotel over in Hampton Beach, and the railroad actually made its line go to stop at his hotel. That was kind of a big deal there. So he was pretty wealthy. And then the ones that, for whatever reason, didn't quite rise to that level, eventually they stayed in town, and eventually they became discriminated against. As the soldiers died off, their children weren't so welcome and didn't have the opportunities. For example, the mill came to town in the 1810 or 20, the mill started, and they had a policy to not hire Black people. Even though the Black people were regular townspeople, they had been to school with the white folks, they married some of the white folks. The policy was that they would not hire Blacks, but instead they hired immigrants, Irish, Polish, people that couldn't speak English, basically, or many could, but many could not speak English at the mills. And that was a problem. And then the economy is going up and down, and certain people get sent to the poor farm at that time. That was a thing, the poor farm. It isn't just a word, my father used to say. The poor farm was a thing. So people got sent to the poor farm, and then the budget of the poor farm got slashed. And I don't know if it was a way to kind of just move people out of town, go live with your relative elsewhere. But many people did go live with their relatives elsewhere. It wasn't welcoming. And I think the last of the families in the town, there's a photograph of Freeman Wallace standing next to possibly Ambrose Swayze. Maybe you've all seen that. And that's probably around 1915 or so. And then it's pretty much over as far as the original revolutionary families that were here.
Yeah, great. So you spoke in the video about how this research has really led you to some activism and artisanm as well. And I would love to know what's going on and if you have any updates on the Pocket Park that you have proposed.
Yes, I have a couple updates. First on the park and then on my second book. So on the park, as I mentioned in the video, I just felt that I really needed to do something personally myself. There's been a lot in the news lately with Black Lives Matter and how much of the wealth or some of the wealth of the country, you have to say the right words here, was built on the backs of redlining and programs like that. So I believe I have benefited from ill-gotten gains, let's just say, and I think it's time for me to give back. So I decided that any profits I'd make from my book, I would give to a physical commemoration of the Black community in Exeter. And I really didn't know what that was at the beginning, and I kind of searched around for a while. And then I came upon, I think a pocket park right on Swayze Parkway would be the thing to commemorate this community, these soldiers. It's right across the street from the Independence Museum, which, as you know, thousands of people come to your festival every year, except for this year. So I thought that would be an appropriate spot for it. And it's simple, it's low maintenance. I think, and the town was very enthusiastic when I proposed it at the select board meeting on Monday night. So the update there is I want to have many entities of the town working with me on this. So I've invited reps from the Historical Society, the Heritage Commission, the Town Planner, the Racial Unity Team, and a few others to work with me and discuss this proposal first, to make sure the location's right, the name is right, everything is right about it. I want it to be a very deliberate and thoughtful act on the part of the town to acknowledge this part of its history in this public way. So I was approved to do that, and we'll have our discussions and report back to the Exeter Select Board in September on a functioning, viable plan, hopefully. All right, so there's number one. And number two, speaking of my trilogy, which you've seen here, this is Incident at Exeter Tavern, but book number two, Incident at Ioka, just came out today online. So if you go on Amazon, you can get that. And that one talks about abolitionist era Exeter. And this talks about Jude Hall's nephew, James Monroe Whitfield. And he actually published a book of abolitionist poems in 1853. And that book of poetry is now held in the Library of Congress as an important piece of Americana. And so I went to look him up. I found out about him in the David Dixon report as I was researching for the literary festival, because, as you know, I founded this literary festival in Exeter a couple of years ago, and I was looking for local authors of yesteryear, and I came up with this guy. So I was researching him, and I have a lot of information on him as well, so I put him into the book. And this book deals more, it's not a revolutionary one, it's set in 1841, also in today, and it talks about the Exeter Select Board. The chair of the Exeter Select Board is missing. That's the gist of it, where in the first one, the Declaration of Independence was stolen. So I can't give away any more than that.
Oh no, you
but if you do, anybody out there, if you do purchase the book, all the profits go towards this pocket park. So you'd be supporting the park as well as informing yourself on a little bit of Exeter history.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the books, and thank you so much for all that work you're doing for Exeter. I'd like to say Renay's referenced a few things, which is an article, a really fantastic, perhaps the only peer-reviewed scholarly article written about the Black population of Exeter by David Dixon. And I just put a link to that in the chat feature. So if anybody wants to grab that, I really encourage you to look at that, as well as a link to Exeter Historical Society, one of their history minutes, as well as Renay's webpage. So people can check that all out and find those in the chat. I think I had one more question for you, and you've probably covered some of it already in you're talking about your civic engagement, but I thought this was really interesting. In your original outline for your Jude Hall report, you say, this report is not meant to be scholarly, but serve as inspiration to scholars, creatives, and other influencers. Can you speak to this and tell us more about the role citizens can play in understanding our shared history and then civic engagement today?
Oh, yeah, sure. So before I decided to write a book, I thought I should do something, but I really didn't know what to do. I mean, like many of you out there, I'm just a regular person. Like, I didn't really do anything. What can I do? But, I'm also active in environmentalism, and anybody can change out a light bulb in their house and start the process. So similarly, I decided, well, I'll take the Dixon report and I'll take out some pieces of it, as well as some of the other things that Barbara Rimkunis has written and other people, and I'll put it into a report about the poet James Monroe Whitfield, who we highlight during this Exeter Literary Festival every year. We have one of his poems read from the stage. And I set a goal to myself to sit down with 100 people in the town of Exeter and ask them to do something. And at the back of the report, I put a bulleted list of all kinds of things I could think of, like get a copy of the Whitfield book in the library at your school or town, all kinds of things. So I went, and the people in this town are great, and when I called or emailed them, they all sat with me. So I sat with teachers, asked them to do something in their classroom. And actually, Adam Krause over at the high school took that up, and there ended up being this beautiful mural with Jude Hall, James Monroe Whitfield, and Wallace Freeman, this beautiful mural. So I talked to pastors, saying that, maybe for Black History Month, you might want to mention this part about Exeter's history from the pulpit or wherever else. I talked to the town planner. I talked to various town officials. I talked to everybody in this town. So I made it up to about 70 And then basically the pandemic hit. And the last thing I had done was a talk at the Exeter Historical Society about this, and there were 30 people in the room. So I'm just going to say I made it to 100 before the pandemic.
I think that's great.
So I think, and when I say I'm trying to talk to influencers and creatives, and also I wanted to have other people like do creative things, like maybe take this story and write a play or a song. I did ask some songwriters if they wanted to write a song, which they could, you know, who knows, if we get this Pocket Park together, maybe somebody will have written a song and they can play it at the opening or the ribbon cutting or whatever, if it all comes to pass. And it may not come to pass, it might be something else altogether, but I do believe that now is the time that Exeter will acknowledge the past in a very public way.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. You referenced that beautiful mural. I know exactly which one you're just speaking to. A couple of high school students created it or worked with an artist to create it and did a lot of research themselves. And I shared a link to that work that they did. It's now housed, I believe, at the Racial Unity Team's website. So there's also a link to that for everybody to check out on the chat. And the mural is really quite breathtaking. They did a gorgeous job on it. I'm going to go to the chat now. Thank you so much, Renay, for answering those questions. What we have in the chat from April, we have, do you know of any living ancestors of the Black families who were from Exeter during the colonial period? Just thinking how wonderful, April's from the DAR, thinking how wonderful it would be to have Jude Hall or Tobias Cutler's descendants in the DAR, and just interested to know if you've made any contact or talked to any descendants.
Okay, well, yes, I have actually. But, you know, that's kind of a tricky question. Like, what do you say when you contact them? But I haven't done the family tree of Jude Hall. The person that I was interested in was a descendant of the poet James Monroe Whitfield. Since we honor him at the Lit Fest every year by reading a poem of his during our closing finale, I wanted to invite any of his local descendants to come and witness this reading from the stage. So I contacted a genealogist, and he came up with all these names in the Boston area. And so I looked at all the names on the paper, and I'm like, oh, who and what, and you know, you don't get contact information or anything. You just have names, so you have to look up, and you go on Facebook, and you hope maybe it's the person. But anyway, I did find a boy that was working at a writing center in Boston. So he was a writer, and when I say boy, he's probably 30 or so. So I contacted him, and I said, hey, you don't know me, but I think you're the descendant of this poet, and we're having a reading. And I didn't invite him to the festival because I never quite made it that far, because as you know, the pandemic came, and we were one of the very first things in Exeter to be canceled. We were trying to figure out if we should hold this by March 1st, because the event was on April 4th. So I never got quite to that part. The pandemic interrupted our conversation. But I did email with him a couple times. I sent him the genealogy report, and, you know, he had no idea. So, yeah, so, you know, something like that, I think when it comes to your family, I think it's the graceful thing to do to kind of let it sink in a little bit before you ask them. So, you know, maybe if we do manage to have the Lit Fest next year without social distancing, who knows if that's going to happen or if we're going to have to wait one more year. But I'm certainly going to invite him, his entire family, any relatives, to the Lit Fest to witness the reading.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great.
Yeah. And I do think that Jude Hall's relatives could be found. Mm-hmm. But you'd have to be a genealogist or maybe have an Ancestry.com. You know, I think they could be found, but I haven't gotten that far yet. I didn't really know what I would say to them. But if we do have a Pocket Park, then we could invite them to the opening.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And also from April, she's, like she said, a member of the DAR in Exeter. Just a nice invitation for you to present to them at some point when it's safe to do so. And also she mentions that they do a lot of care for the Winter Street Cemetery, which I'm aware of because we hold our Ghosts of Winter Street Cemetery program up there. And they would just love to hear more about your research. So that's nice to hear from them.
Oh, great. Yeah. I'd love to talk to them, and they do a really good job on that cemetery.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of people put a lot of effort into that cemetery, and there's a lot of nice things that the DAR have done up there. So that's fantastic. I don't see any more questions in the question feature right now. So if anybody wanted to ask a question live, I think we're happy to go to that. And I'll still keep my eye on the Q. Oh, maybe I have one more. Hold on real quick. April also says that she would happy to be helpful with any genealogy as well. So bonus. Yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you, April. Again, I'll keep my eye on the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. But if anybody wants to ask a live question of Renay, feel free to use the raise your hand feature, and Bob at XTV can unmute you and let you ask your question. If people are mulling it over, let me see if I have any other questions. Well, here's another one. When you are in your video, when you're describing the physicality of Jude and his wife, is it Rhoda or Rhonda? Rhoda. You're using very physically descriptive language. I have a concept of why this is, but I wanted to ask you, was that language you found in your research as you were those specific, talking about Jude Hall as being, I think, strong, big and strong, and little Rhoda being little. I'm assuming that is coming from language you found in your research. Am I correct?
Yes, it definitely is. Jude Hall, in any account of his, not his account, there's nothing left that was written by him except for his signature, which you saw on the opening screen there. That was his actual signature. Barbara recently found that, maybe 2 months ago. Very exciting. But they all say he was a very tall and powerful man. He had a powerful physique. Contemporary accounts of him say he was about 6 feet tall, and that he could lift a barrel of cider and drink from the tap. What that means, I don't exactly know, because I don't know what a barrel of cider looks like, but I just assume that if he's picking up a huge keg and drinking with no problem. So that's the physical descriptions of him. Rhoda, I describe her as little because she was so much younger than him. She was only about 6 years old when the Declaration of Independence came to town. She was very young, and he was probably 20. 19 or 20. So there's an age difference there. But also, there's another scholar that has done some report, because when Jude was at the Windsor Valley encampment, I believe that's in the Hudson Valley, and there's another scholar, Matt Thorens, I think is his name. He does a program called Teaching the Hudson Valley, and he talks about patriots of color. And actually, all these things that I'm talking about are referenced at the end of Jude's Wikipedia article. So if you go online and look up Jude Hall, and then you look at the references at the bottom, you can click right through to these things that I'm talking about, where I got the information on the physicalness. And also, Jude fought at the Battle of Monmouth, which was a very harsh battle. And that's where he earned his nickname, apparently, which was Old Rock. Oh. So that kind of says something. I mean, maybe you wouldn't describe me as rock, but Jude, I think, was kind of a rock guy. In addition, in town, they used to call him Captain. He was known by the name as Captain. So I don't know if he was actually captain of his regiment, or if he was the de facto captain of certain part of his regiment, or or why they called him captain, but he was definitely a large man and a leader from all the accounts of him.
That's really interesting. Those are really interesting points to bring up. I know in a lot of instances when you're looking at Black people from that period of time and seeing how they're written about, which is usually by white people, not by themselves, right, you are seeing a lot of physical description. And part of that is because of slavery at the time and describing people, because those physical characteristics were considered important if you were going to engage in the act of selling human beings. But it does sound like Jude's is a little more nuanced than that, having his past military record and things like that also come to play in those descriptive language of him. So that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
That's really interesting. Let me see if we have, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. I'll say again that I see one. Who has it? So April has her hand raised. So I'm going to have Bob unmute her and let her ask her question. Hi, April.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Hi.
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 So I heard you say that Jude had 3 sons that were kidnapped. Do you know how many children he had altogether? Was it just the 3?
No. He and Rhoda had many children, and it's hard to know exactly how many. It might be 10 or 12. I tried to find out from Barbara at the Historical Society. It's just very unclear, as many of the records are back then. You know, if you've got the same names are used and one dies and then they use it again, it's hard to know. But he had 4 sons that I know of, and maybe 4 or 5 daughters. But of the sons, 3 were kidnapped into slavery. James, off of Drinkwater Road, as I mentioned, he was never heard from again. However, recently, Barbara came across an article in William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator, and this is probably like a month ago, that was an affidavit of Rhoda's testimony as to what happened when her son was stolen and what she found out. And this was 20 years after the event. So it wasn't like it was useful at the time. I mean, the kid was already gone for 20 years, but it turned out that she gave the name of the ship. She gave the name of where he went to. He debarked in, I believe it was Annapolis or somewhere. No, it was in Virginia. He debarked in Virginia and was sold to a person in Kentucky, a doctor in Kentucky. But Jude never heard from him again. 2 other ones were stolen while at sea. People, their sons had enlisted on like merchant ships, and once they got out to sea, people would just take them. That was kind of a common thing. And I kind of have a feeling that that's a similar thing that was supposed to happen to James, because the argument why he was stolen is because he was allegedly booked as a worker on that ship and accepted $4 in payment to do that, and then decided not to do that. So the captain, or I'm not really sure who, ordered somebody to town to take him to honor his contract. But I think maybe he had an idea that the contract was kind of phony. But there was one son that did not get kidnapped, and he remained in Exeter. He moved to Brentwood, and then he eventually moved to Epping, I believe. And his son, this would be Jude Hall's grandson named Moses, was in town. He worked for the sculptor Daniel Chester French, possibly lived at their house for a while, and also attended Phillips Exeter Academy. And then he ended up living in Epping, and he was a stonemason in town, and many of his stone masonry works still exist in that town.
Fantastic.
So does that answer your question, April?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I also wondered, so every time I drive down Drinkwater Road, I think about Jude Hall, and I wonder where exactly was his property. Do you know where it was?
No, I don't know where it was. I mean, the pond is there and the paths are there, but there's nothing left of a structure. From the tax records, it was a small one-story structure. So it wasn't like it was any big brick situation or anything. I believe it was just a small wooden structure, and that was, in 1780, and there's no, it's been reclaimed by nature.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, April. Any other questions? We're coming up to 7 o'clock, so we have time for a few more questions if anybody has any. Again, I will encourage everybody to look at those links. There's quite a few of them now that I dropped into the chat because they reference a lot of the research links that Renay has already talked about, as well as her own webpage. And Renay, your book is available online exclusively at this point in time? Or can you get it anywhere else?
Just the second one is online exclusively. It should be at Water Street Bookstore in a couple of weeks. The first one is already at the bookstore. You can go on down there and get it.
Great. And a reminder that all the proceeds from those, the sale of those books are going to this project, this Pocket Park project, or whatever it should become, that Renay is working on. So that's really, really exciting. Just great that you're working on that, Renay. I'm just going to check the Q&A one more time to make sure I didn't miss anything, which I did not. It looks like we don't have any more questions coming in. Anything else you'd like to add, Renay?
I'd just like to thank you for your time. I've been trying to get the word more public, and you giving me this opportunity is really helpful to not only for right now, but I think as you keep this video up there and people check into it over the years, I think it will be helpful as well. So I thank you for the opportunity. And I thank all the people who have done the work before me, because I am by no means the first person doing this. It takes a village, that kind of a thing. So thank you to everybody who's interested in reclaiming Exeter's Black history.
Thank you so very much, Renay. This has been fantastic. We've loved having you and loved working with you. Again, I point people to the chat because there's a lot going on in there. If you're looking for that information, we've also added Jude Hall Wikipedia page, so you can look right at that as well. And I'll remind everybody that this is the second to the last day of the Reimagined American Independence Festival. We're going to have a reading of the Declaration of Independence that has been a community-sourced reading on XTV. Is going to show that tomorrow at noon. So check that out, but also check out our webpage. Because we'll have links to some of the things that we've already done. And there's a great town scavenger hunt. Jude Hall may or may not be on there. So check out things like that on our webpage as well. And definitely go out and get Renay's books and follow her work and see what's going on with that Pocket Park. So Renay, thank you so very much, Bob.